It's December 2019. People were mysteriously getting sick in Wuhan, China, but for all intents and purposes, it was business as usual in the world. In the mechanical keyboard hobby, though, there was a singular event that would drastically shift the landscape for the better: the release of the Alpaca linear switch from Prime Keyboards. We've talked about this in previous videos, but back in 2019, your only real options for smooth linears were vintage Cherry MX Blacks or Gateron Black Inks, and if you were a real glutton for punishment, Telios from ZLPC. JWK Duroc was relatively unknown, but all of that changed with the release of the Alpaca. 2020 was definitely the year of JWK, or I guess I should say the year of the Alpaca, because not only were the Alpacas arguably the first good stock MX switch, but at only 55 cents per switch, it also undercut the 65 cent per switch price floor that was the norm. So before there was Texi with the Bolsa Supply Zakus and the current B-Sun and HMX hype, there was JWK, which was the first switch manufacturer to take away meaningful market share from Cherry and Gateron. However, in the past few years, JWK switches have definitely fallen out of favor for one specific reason: leaf noise. Back in 2020, when every switch required pretty extensive modding for peak performance, JWK's leaf noise wasn't considered any better or worse than Gateron QC or Cherry Spring Pink. But starting around the latter half of 2022 and well into 2023, smaller manufacturers like Haimu and Meirun and the aforementioned B-Sun started offering switches that were ready to use right out of the box at anywhere from 35 to 50 cents per switch. And JWK started looking stale and flawed in comparison. Well, these are the JWK manufactured Hera linears from Moyu Studio. And let's see how a more recent JWK offering stands up to the current quality standard in the mechanical keyboard hobby. If you haven't heard of Moyu Studio, they're a Chinese keyboard vendor who got their start in 2020 running Domiki keycap group buys, and the Hera is the third in their line of Greek mythology themed switches. According to this blog post on their website, they have some affiliation with Wikuo, although it's not entirely clear what that relationship looks like. But getting back to the Heras, they're a long pull linear switch with a full milky housing and an LY stem. There are two options for spring weights, 48 grams or 60 gram bottom mount, and we're testing the 48 gram version today. The spring itself is a 21mm long triple stage spring, and total travel on these switches is 3.8mm. As they are JWK manufactured, I'm not too optimistic about the stock experience, but let's take a listen in the Luminkey 65, which is a gasket mounted 65% board with a polycarbonate plate. Here's the typing test. So these switches are surprisingly decent stock, and I'd have no problem using them in their stock form. There is the tiniest bit of leaf noise or ticking during normal use, and that is despite the factory lube on the stem legs. I wanted to see how lube could change the sound signature on these switches, so let's take a listen to these switches after my normal lube job in the Luminkey 65. Here we go. So after lubing the stem legs, the slight ticking mostly went away, and I'm actually a big fan of the sound signature after lubing the top housings. However, I wanted to try these switches in a board without any foams because in my experience, foams do help mitigate ticking to some extent. So I put them in my cruelworld 60, which is also a gasket mounted 60% board with a polycarbonate plate. Interestingly enough, the extra resonance in the cruelworld board without foams meant that the leaf noise that was kind of masked in my Luminkey 65 was definitely more audible. Now don't get me wrong, it's clear that JWK has done something to improve the leaf noise in these switches, but I'd be lying if I said these switches had no leaf noise. So let's take a listen. can still hear the wobble. Overall, I'm really pleased with the type feel of these switches, as the 48-gram bottom out's right in line with my preferred spring weight. But that really comes down to personal preference. So should you buy these switches? And the answer to that question is a bit more nuanced than usual with my recommendations. Starting with the Gateron Milky Yellows, I've always been a fan of the sound signature of Milky switches, and I think the softness of the LY stem is a great combination for a soft but thocky sound. I really loved the Heras until I tried them in a board with no foams. So I'd say depending on your build, these could be a great pickup. I also need to note that I didn't specifically lube for leaf noise, as there are lubing methods that will fix the minimal leaf noise in the Heras compared to more typical JWK switches, but in 2024 I really wish JWK could do something about their leaves. After all, when you've got switches from manufacturers like Haimu, Meirun, HMX, and Bsun that have absolutely no leaf noise at honestly a more affordable price, it makes it kind of hard to recommend at the end of the day. But if you want to pick them up yourself, they're available with limited stock at various international vendors, and at 59 cents per switch at Valve Supply at least, I'd say they're worth picking some up to try. Check out some more keyboard content here. I'm MakerMods, and I'll catch you in the next video.